The best part of growing potatoes, harvesting them, or digging for gold as we like to call it. This is part 3 of my potato growing series, and I'm showing you how and when we harvest potatoes, how to cure them so that they keep a long time in storage, and a couple options for storing long term so they last until next year's potatoes are ready. We've been growing around 200 to 300 pounds of potatoes every year for 10 years, fine-tuning our methods along the way. So if it feels like there are a lot of details here, there is, and that's why. Potatoes are serious business here on our homestead. When should you harvest potatoes and when can you harvest potatoes? Those are two different questions. You can start harvesting potatoes about 2 weeks after the plants have flowered, which for us here in Wisconsin is around mid-July. This is when the potatoes underground should be about golf ball size or bigger and actually worth digging. Now they will not have reached their full size yet, so by harvesting them young, you will sacrifice quite a bit of yield. But for us, it's worth it, and we plant plenty of extras to accommodate us digging and eating them all summer long before they're full grown. Potatoes that are dug when they're not yet mature and they're eaten fresh are referred to as new potatoes. You may have heard that term before. They're typically a little sweeter, they have thinner skin, and they are a summer delicacy. They will be small, but gosh, did they taste good. You can dig any variety of potato as a new potato, but I purposefully grow a couple varieties that are known to be super early producers so that I can get potatoes as soon as possible in the summer and have them be as big as possible. These early varieties that I like are Caribe, Dark Red Norland, and Upstate Abundance. The actual proper time to harvest potatoes is after the plants die back. When the plants are dead and shriveled and dried, the potatoes won't get any bigger. However, if you want your potatoes to store a long time, it's actually best to wait even a little bit longer and harvest them about 2 weeks after all the greens have fully died. This ensures that the potatoes are not only as large as they can possibly be, but that they have an opportunity to toughen up their skins a little and detach properly from the plant. This is, of course, the gold standard in a perfect world. There are reasons that you might want to dig potatoes a little bit earlier than that, like if something is eating them or when winter is knocking on the door. Now, if you want an easy way to remember when to harvest potatoes, just think of the number 2. 2 weeks after the plants have flowered for new potatoes, and 2 weeks after the plants have died back for potatoes that will store into winter. As far as what we harvest them with, you can get a proper potato digging fork, which is like a thick, pronged pitchfork looking thing, but we just use a shovel. I think you can stab a potato with a prong just about as easily as you can slice it with a shovel. To dig a hill of potatoes, he puts the shovel a ways back from where the center of the plant was and then steps the shovel deep into the ground. Then, as he likes to call it, he pulls the potato lever. He does. He really does say that. Then he usually digs 1 or 2 more scoops, being cautious to keep the shovel back, trying to get underneath the potatoes. And then he usually takes 1 more shovelful from the other side of the hole too. Speaking of, every different variety of potato is a little bit different in how deep it grows and how far it spreads away from the plant. And as you dig a certain variety, you'll get the hang of its growing habit and how far back to put your shovel and how deep to dig so that you don't damage any potatoes and so that you don't miss any. Carl is our designated potato digger, and he usually slices a couple at the beginning of digging, but by the end he's got a good handle on exactly where to dig, and he doesn't ruin any of them. Practice makes perfect, as they say, and if you do slice one, just use that one right away. All of the information here going forward will be for harvesting potatoes with the intent to store them. If you're harvesting new potatoes, of course you just dig them and eat them. If you want potatoes to store well, you'll have to do a few specific things. Mother Nature doesn't always cooperate, but if possible, it's best to dig your potatoes after it's been dry. If you dig them after a rain, you'll just be digging in the mud and the potatoes will be caked with dirt and it's a mess. It's also not good for the potato storage life if they have a lot of dirt caked on them, so be intentional about this. However, having said that, we have had years of drought where the soil is very hard and dry, and that makes digging potatoes a real pain too. So I guess it's one of those Goldilocks situations. And if you're watering, you'll of course want to stop at some point before harvesting. Immediately after digging the potatoes, they need to be cured. This just means letting them sit for a couple weeks for the skins to toughen up and to heal minor cuts and scrapes so that the potatoes last in storage and don't just rot. If you look up guides for curing potatoes, you will typically find very specific instructions for temperature and humidity, around 45 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit with 90% humidity. In an ideal world, yes, but I don't know many people who can accommodate those conditions for a decent amount of potatoes, and I can tell you that we don't. Digging potatoes in the fall time in Wisconsin means our temperatures are naturally in the 45 to, I'd say, 70 degree Fahrenheit range, so Mother Nature is mostly working with us there, but we can definitely have some days that are warmer than that, and the humidity is whatever it's going to be, and I'm sure it's nowhere near 90%. We also do have the benefit of having an insulated garage shop, so the temperature stays a little bit more steady and it also traps in a bit more moisture. Here's what works well for us. We set out some boards on the floor of our shop to put the potatoes on. This is just so they're not on the ground where the car was parked. Make sure that whatever you set them on is breathable. I would not set them on plastic because that can trap moisture. Our shop has a couple of windows which we cover with thick black plastic. It's extremely important that wherever you're curing your potatoes is very, very dark. As we harvest, which we do over multiple days because potato digging is a lot of work, we dump them out onto the boards and arrange them in a single layer. I'd like to say that we leave them there to cure for the recommended 2 weeks, but sometimes, most years actually, life happens and they stay out there a little bit longer than that. With it being dark in our shop and the cool weather of fall setting in, it's a fine place for them to hang out. And by the way, the smaller lumber here, the 2x4s, are serving two purposes. Number one, to keep the potatoes from rolling off the back of the board when he dumps them out. And two, they're separating varieties. I often grow anywhere from 10 to 25 different varieties of potatoes. The next step for us is cleaning and inspecting. It's generally not recommended to wash your potatoes with water before storing them, so we don't. When I say cleaning, I mean that we rub off any excess dirt. During the wetter years, they might have a little bit more dirt clinging, and during drier years, they pretty much have no dirt, which is nice. This was a dry year. You can see here they look pretty clean straight out of the ground. This is also a great opportunity to inspect the potatoes, and if you've ever experienced smelling a festering, rotten potato, you know why this is important. So we sort them with only the perfect pristine potatoes going into bags or sacks for long-term storage. Anything with a rodent chew mark or a bug hole or a slice from the shovel, we put into a different bin to be used first. This is because if the skin is significantly broken, bacteria can get in and cause it to rot. And any that are really, really bad, unsalvageable, or already starting to rot, go into a bucket and onto the compost pile. If you remember one thing from this video, let it be that potatoes absolutely need to be kept cool, ideally at 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Potatoes can be tricky because if kept at warm room temperature, they'll just sprout right away, but if kept too cold, they can get something called cold-induced sweetening. Also extremely important, they need to be kept in total darkness, but in something breathable, and ideally they should be kept somewhere humid too, but from my experience, that isn't a deal breaker. For many years, we've stored our potatoes in our house. We have an 1800s farmhouse and discovered that one of our coat closets must not be insulated very well in the outside wall because it gets very cold in there in the winter, staying around 50 degrees. I think most normal people would probably be bothered by this, but for us it's perfect. We call it our root cellar closet, and it's not a true and real root cellar. It does fluctuate with the outside temperature, but it does work pretty well. Of course, if you do have an actual root cellar, that is the ideal place to store potatoes. It's literally in the name. And for root cellar storage, I really like mesh onion type bags, wooden crates, breathable plastic produce crates, or even paper grocery bags. I do realize that a root cellar is a primitive house feature that most people don't have anymore, so luckily there is one other good and more modern option. Potatoes will store wonderfully in a refrigerator. It's cool, it's dark, and it's decently humid. It is recommended to keep the fridge around 45 degrees Fahrenheit, which will prevent the potatoes from turning some of their starch into sugar and developing a weird flavor when cooked. Note that this is higher than what is safe for storing regular perishable foods like meat. It's a perfect use for that extra beverage fridge in the garage or a cheap Craigslist fridge. The potatoes do need to breathe, and paper grocery bags work well at allowing air exchange, but keeping some humidity in. To show you some real-life examples, these are potatoes that we put in the refrigerator in October and are taking out in April. Some are a little bit wrinkly, but still very edible and pretty high quality for storing that long. And here's a comparison of potatoes that I stored in our makeshift root cellar closet versus the fridge. The ones on top that are growing long sprouts were from our root cellar closet. Not perfect, because it isn't a perfect root cellar. And on the bottom are the potatoes of the same variety that I stored in the refrigerator, and they look great. Here's a variety called German butter that stored particularly well in the refrigerator, which is great because it's one of our favorites. After 6 months in the fridge, they are very firm and perfect looking, and it's so nice to have beautiful homegrown potatoes all the way into spring. There is one more option that's a little unconventional and maybe not super practical, but it could be helpful for some, so I'll mention it. You can actually bury potatoes and store them in the ground. I only have experience with doing this in a cold northern climate where the ground freezes, but it's worked really well for us. We put cured potatoes in a wire mesh bag to protect against rodents and bury them about 2 feet underground. We aren't accessing these potatoes until the ground thaws in spring, but it is a way for you to potentially have fresh potatoes in the springtime. There are a few variables with this, like how deep your ground freezes if it does, and you really don't have control over the temperature, so try a small test batch and see how they do for you. I'll link the mesh bags we use in the video description below. This is actually how we've started storing our seed potatoes, and I will talk in depth about this method in the next video of this series. Now, if none of these methods are an option for you and you don't have anywhere cool and dark to store potatoes long term, you will need to preserve them. They can be dehydrated or canned, though by far my favorite way to preserve potatoes is freezing. I go over several different methods for freezing potatoes in my book, Freeze Fresh, and I'll link that below too. There is one more variable that can affect the storage life of your potatoes, and that's their variety. Like many types of fruits and vegetables, some just store better than others, especially if your storage conditions aren't perfect. In my experience, earlier potatoes and smaller potatoes like fingerling varieties don't store quite as well. And russets are always my best storing variety, even in our makeshift root cellar. If you didn't catch the other videos in this series, I go over preparing and planting seed potatoes in part 1, and weeding, hilling, and pest control in part 2. And in the next video, part 4, I'm going to show you how we save our own seed potatoes every year. As always, let me know if you have any questions, and if you found this video helpful, I would love it if you could give it a thumbs up or leave me a comment. I love reading your comments. And make sure to subscribe to my channel so that you are the first to know whenever a new video is posted.